Pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you, and I strongly recommend that you close any other browser tabs to avoid distractions. What you are about to hear is not a conspiracy theory originating from obscure internet forums, nor is it one of those cheap, alarmist financial speculations made purely to generate easy clicks. We are, in fact, facing an imminent and mathematically undeniable structural fracture in the global financial market, something that the mainstream media has categorically refused to report with the necessary weight and urgency. They prefer to maintain the illusion of unshakable stability, anesthetizing the public with superficial debates and irrelevant headlines, while the central pillars of the real economy are silently and rapidly crumbling under the unsustainable weight of empty paper promises. If you value your family's financial survival, listen carefully. The trigger for this catastrophe has already been activated, and the systemic implosion has begun, whether you realize it or not. In the obscure institutional backrooms of the global economy, COMEX's physical silver stocks are suffering a catastrophic and utterly relentless drain, culminating in massive withdrawals that surpassed the shocking mark of 2,250,000 ounces in a single day, reducing the total inventory to the alarmingly critical levels of 364 million ounces. Simultaneously, on the other side of the world, at the Shanghai Futures Exchange, a single gigantic institutional player holds a colossal short position of 450 metric tons. The truly terrifying detail that everyone is hiding? This volume absurdly exceeds the entire physical inventory available on that exchange, which is currently languishing with 350 tons available. This structural crisis is not an event projected for the distant future. It is the visceral reality of the very present you are breathing today. The COMEX Silver Implied Volatility Index recently broke through the terrifying threshold of 100. In the cold, calculating language of institutional market makers, this signals not mere price fluctuation, but rather an exact pricing in of extremely violent liquidity events and a potential breakdown in systemic continuity. To accelerate this death spiral, the relentless advent of advanced cognitive automation, led by innovative artificial intelligences, has purged over $52 billion in value from legacy technology companies in just 2 bloody market sessions. This instantaneous obliteration of unreal value triggered a blind, panicked capital flight, transferring liquidity from paper to tangible assets against an already depleted market. To understand the magnitude of this rapidly approaching structural implosion, you need to swallow the red pill about how the precious metals market really works behind the scenes. The central crisis lies not in the simple lack of ore extracted from the earth, but in the inevitable collapse of a derivative system based on a perverse fractional reserve on real commodities. For uninterrupted decades, the global financial market has priced silver and gold through a continuous and virtually endless issuance of paper contracts. This fraudulent mechanism has always operated under the false and arrogant premise that the delivery of the physical metal would rarely be demanded by investors. The security you have always perceived in the daily quotes on trading screens is a systemic illusion, a gigantic smokescreen meticulously designed to conceal a completely corroded financial pipeline. What is quietly breaking down right now, far from the spotlight of traditional media, is the absolute reliance of megacorporations on their financial counterparts. As we observe the accelerating collapse of global geopolitics, with severe tensions paralyzing strategic minds in Mexico and relentless trade wars destroying supply chains, the mathematics of risk changes dramatically. Add to that persistent inflation, eroding purchasing power, and the mass replacement of jobs by cognitive automation, forcing smart capital to initiate a desperate flight from unbacked paper to the safety of physical assets. what we are witnessing is not a mere technical market correction, but a true systemic bank run. However, instead of panicking to withdraw inflated dollars from ATMs, large institutions are frantically rushing to withdraw tangible metals from global vaults. The lethal mechanism that irreversibly broke down in the bowels of Wall Street was what we call naked short selling, a parasitic practice strongly tied to the growing inefficiency of international cross-arbitrage. The operational mechanism of this institutionalized fraud is disturbingly simple and brutal. Futures contracts freely allow institutional speculators to sell massive quantities of silver daily that they simply do not possess in their physical inventories. In times of normalcy and systemic complacency, these mega speculators habitually just roll over their artificial positions to the next month's expiration, silently pushing the colossal problem aside financially. They treat physical commodity markets as if they were mere casinos of abstract digital numbers, completely ignoring the severe physical limitations of mineral extraction in the real world. The illusion perpetuates the lie until physics inevitably exacts its due with pure violence. However, the once functional market plumbing has fatally clogged, and colossal dominoes have begun to fall in an overwhelming sequence, impossible to contain through government intervention. Right now, we have a ticking time bomb. 44,500 open contracts, equivalent to an exorbitant 223 million ounces of silver, remain pending mere days before the dreaded first delivery notice. The actual physical inventory, already dramatically drained by years of deficits, lacks the mathematical capacity to cover the voracious and simultaneous demand of the Western Hemisphere, with the suffocating pressure from the East through the Shanghai Exchange. This creates a destructive funnel of forced liquidation, the classic strangulation of short positions, but on a macroeconomic scale, with absolutely no precedent in modern financial history, threatening to shatter all stability in the derivatives market. We have therefore reached a terrifying tipping point where it becomes mathematically impossible for authorities to repair this deep fracture without inflicting severe pain on the global economy. Stock exchanges and regulatory bodies are squeezed into a completely inescapable systemic trap. If these brokers panic and decide to force a cash liquidation, imposing the dreaded in-kind settlement on investors, they will be publicly confessing to a colossal financial crime. They will be undeniably admitting to the world that the commodity futures contract, revered for decades as a safe haven, is essentially a monumental fraud, devoid of any tangible backing. This lethal admission would instantly vaporize the paltry credibility that still remains in the entire gigantic global derivatives market, triggering a destructive and uncontrollable repricing that would spread like wildfire through the main sectors of the Western banking economy. On the other hand, if these same institutions, cornered by the harsh physical reality of brutal scarcity, decide to honor the original rules and effectively allow the demand for the full physical delivery of the promised metals, the scenario becomes even more apocalyptic for the establishment. For the math to add up amidst such a grotesque imbalance, the spot price of silver will necessarily have to explode to astronomical levels, completely unthinkable today. This parabolic and insane surge in the price will be the only force capable of persuading the strong and resilient holders of real physical silver to finally sell their painstakingly accumulated ounces to bail out a pathetic and insolvent financial system. From any rigorous angle you dare to analyze this macabre situation, the current fiduciary house of cards is inevitably collapsing, and the relentless crushing of those unwary who bet on the systemic illusion is already irreversibly programmed. To understand the sheer gravity of what we are witnessing today, we need to look to the past, because the patterns of financial destruction are mathematically identical. The current system acts as if this anomaly were unprecedented. But those who ignore history are doomed to lose everything in it. Let's go back to the monumental collapse of the London gold pool in 1968. At that time, global central banks, in an act of extreme bureaucratic arrogance, formed a financial consortium to try to artificially fix the price of gold at $35 per ounce, flooding the market with empty paper promises. They devoutly believed they could bend the laws of physics and economics with political decrees. However, harsh physical reality always triumphs over fiduciary illusion. France, realizing the systemic fraud, began to relentlessly demand the physical return of its repatriated gold. The result of this French audacity was the evaporation of global liquidity in real time. European coffers emptied at a terrifying speed, the paper consortium collapsed completely, and the price of gold skyrocketed throughout the following decade, destroying those who bet on the system. Shortly afterward, the world witnessed the brutal silver shock of 1980, proving that the systemic trap spares no one. The logic you should memorize today is frighteningly simple. This has happened exactly before. The warning signs were exactly the same, and those who chose to blindly believe the official lies of the media lost absolutely everything. The disaster script follows a predictable pattern. First comes the vehement denial by the authorities about the industrial deficit, quickly followed by silent panic behind the scenes of global institutions. The next step in this historical death spiral is the desperate implementation of authoritarian emergency measures. Just as we have seen in the past, exchanges are beginning to change the rules of the game mid-match, violently increasing margin requirements and freezing positions in a dictatorial manner, as the Shanghai Futures Exchange is already signaling right now. This is the undeniable preamble to the imminent and catastrophic collapse of purely paper-based price fixing. The visceral trigger that detonated the collapse in the fateful 70s was runaway fiat inflation, a massive destruction of purchasing power designed by the central governments themselves. Today, the dynamic is even more lethal and complex because we are not only facing currency degradation, but a multiple failure of the pillars supporting contemporary Western globalized society. The major catalyst today is the aggressive and irreversible deglobalization of the supply chain, driven by the strategic maneuvers of the BRICS and critical shutdowns in Mexico. Simultaneously, we are witnessing a desperate flight to safety, motivated by the extreme labor and technological uncertainty generated by artificial intelligence. As AI obliterates the demand for traditional capital and annihilates white-collar jobs, the system short-circuits. This is the real invisible war. The intelligent individual, armed with real data, against a pathetically broken financial system that tries to survive by stealing your future. You are at a historical crossroads where ignorance will cost you your economic freedom. The patterns have aligned with surgical precision. The collapse of paper is already written in tomorrow's history books, and the only remaining variable is where you will be positioned. If you still naively hope that the Federal Reserve, global central banks, or governments in power will emerge as saviors at the last minute, it's time to wake up to the grim reality of this scenario. The visceral truth is that the financial institutions that orchestrated this house of cards are now trapped in a lethal and utterly inescapable systemic trap. They find themselves agonizing between a rock and a hard place. In previous collapses, the system always resorted to the rampant printing of trillions of fiat dollars to flood markets with artificial liquidity and numb the panic of the blind masses. However, the mechanics of the physical collapse of an essential monetary commodity like silver renders this traditional tool utterly useless. You simply cannot print a metal that doesn't exist in the vaults. no matter how many zeros you add to a digital balance sheet. Any desperate attempt at intervention by the broken system at this precise moment will only act as gasoline on a forest fire, exponentially accelerating the inevitable implosion. If regulatory authorities decide to intervene to protect large short-selling banks, declaring force majeure and forcing the liquidation of all strictly fiat currency contracts, the consequence will be catastrophic. This shameless maneuver would instantly destroy 100% of global confidence in the Western capital market, driving the final nail into the coffin of the already rotten credibility of the U.S. dollar as the hegemonic store of value. Eastern investors and emerging economic blocs would flee en masse, causing a liquidity evaporation to levels that would make the 2008 crash seem like a minor historical stumble. It is guaranteed institutional suicide, broadcast live for the entire planet to watch in terror as an era dies. On the other hand, if policymakers attempt the opposite approach and allow the physical market to find its true equilibrium price to attract sellers, the shock to supply chains will be instantaneous and devastating. Silver is not just historical currency. It is the indispensable backbone of the modern technological revolution in green energy, from vital solar panels to strategic ballistic missiles. An abrupt repricing, with the metal jumping 300% or more in a very short space of time, would trigger rampant cost inflation that would brutally crush the profit margin of all corporations listed on the S&P 500 index. Industrial inflation would be mercilessly passed on to the final consumer, even before the end of the current fiscal quarter, pulverizing the purchasing power of households and guaranteeing a deep and brutally persistent systemic stagflation. When institutional options are exhausted and panic becomes the only abundant metric on the trading floors, the state's response always degenerates into outright financial authoritarianism. To try and contain this death spiral and stem the bleeding in physical metal inventories, governments will inevitably resort to draconian capital controls and veiled confiscations, blocking emergency exits while the house burns down around them. They will freeze brokerage accounts, drastically limit international transfers, and quite possibly invoke national security laws to monopolize strategic assets and prohibit the average citizen from protecting their hard-earned wealth. The system will prioritize its own parasitic survival over the absolute detriment of individual financial well-being. This is the cruel essence of the institutional trap. The very mechanism created to supposedly manage risk has become the primary propagator of impending bankruptcy. Therefore, the illusion that a bureaucratic bailout, a miraculous political maneuver, or a new trillion-dollar central bank package will protect your hard-earned money and financial future must be eradicated from your mind today. The state is organically bankrupt, and large corporations are trapped in a labyrinth of toxic derivatives from which they cannot escape without sacrificing you in the cruel process of deleveraging. The final confrontation of this decade is already drawn. On one side, the gigantic, bureaucratic, and financially rotten state machine. On the other, the alert and intelligent individual who understood the relentless mathematics of disaster before the hypnotized masses. You are completely alone on the front lines of this invisible war of global wealth transfer. The system cannot and will not save you, but there is a narrow window of opportunity for you to save yourself. The time has come to abandon paralyzing fear and adopt a surgical attack posture, because the reward for your attention so far is the 3 fundamental asymmetrical moves for your survival. The first non-negotiable step is to forge your protective shield through the relentless accumulation of physical silver and gold strictly outside the traditional banking system. You must seek internationally segregated, allocated vaults in jurisdictions that respect private property, ensuring that your assets are shielded from counterparty risk. Understand the mathematical gravity of this structural defensive maneuver. If your brokerage firm goes bankrupt tomorrow morning, or if the stock exchange declares the dreaded force majeure to force a liquidation in worthless fiat currency, your tangible physical asset will remain absolutely untouched and immune to the evaporation of liquidity that will destroy the mass of unsuspecting investors. Your second tactical maneuver is the sword, focused on calculated aggression to profit from the implosion and inevitable systemic repricing. The precise move requires the strategic purchase of call options operating strictly out of the money and targeting exclusively silver mining companies located in safe Tier 1 jurisdictions. We are strictly talking about consolidated companies in the United States, Canada, and Australia, shielding your capital against increasing geopolitical risk. You should categorically avoid any exposure to Mexico at this critical moment, due to the imminent risk of nationalization of strategic assets or violent disruption of operations by uncontrollable cartels. By positioning your capital in this surgical manner, you asymmetrically leverage your potential gains when the strangulation of short positions forces spot prices to historical levels completely unimaginable today. The third and final asymmetrical move crowns your tactical empowerment by using the very force of technological destruction to your advantage. You will execute short positions, buying put options, betting massively against legacy technology companies based on outdated corporate services. The revenue models of these giants are being ruthlessly cannibalized by cognitive automation and real-time artificial intelligence, suffering an unstoppable death spiral. The ingeniously perverse objective of this counterflow directional tactic is that you fully finance your risk in the imminent silver short squeeze using the profit generated by aggressive deflation in white-collar cognitive sectors. While most people passively watch their traditional jobs and investment portfolios evaporate, you transform the implosion of a broken paradigm into the perfect financial leverage for your ultimate structural independence. What you just witnessed isn't just another entertainment video on the internet. It's a dossier of raw intelligence designed for your survival. The mainstream media will continue lying, projecting an illusion of normalcy, while the coffers of COMEX and SHFE are emptied in real time before your very eyes. To avoid being swallowed by this systemic implosion, you can't simply enjoy this content and go back to sleep. You need to subscribe to this channel immediately and activate all available notifications. We are your information bunker, your only continuous source of tactical intelligence, dissecting every move of the governmental and financial collapse daily. By joining this trench, you will witness the structural fracture of the market minute by minute, arming yourself with the truth that Wall Street desperately tries to hide from you at all costs. The systemic trap doesn't warn you when it's about to pull the financial guillotine. While 99% of the population remains hypnotized by the daily fluctuations of unreal assets, the window of opportunity to protect your wealth is rapidly evaporating liquidity. At this very moment in 2026, the relentless mathematics of the derivatives market points to an imminent collapse, and our mission here is to provide the exact map of the minefield. By joining our subscribed membership base, you gain unrestricted access to in-depth analysis, decoding how the flight of institutional capital directly affects your dinner table. The broken system operates in the shadows of collective ignorance. Our continuous intelligence is the merciless spotlight that exposes the rats abandoning the already rapidly sinking fiduciary ship. We are building an unbreakable digital fortress, assembling a silent army of intelligent individuals who are fully aware that the current state of affairs is unsustainable. The tension between you, seeking to preserve the fruits of your labor, and the broken system, which plans to silently confiscate them through inflation, is the true invisible war of our century. Engrave this phrase in your mind. The financial system wants you vulnerable and dependent, but our community demands that you be sovereign and lethally prepared. We will not face this death spiral isolated in our homes. We will operate as a bloc, exchanging evasion tactics, warning of account freezes, and identifying the next catastrophic failures in Western stock markets. Your registration is not a number to inflate futile metrics, but rather confirmation of your active enlistment in this wealth preservation revolution. Now I need a brutally honest and personal answer from you, because the debate in our comments section is where true guerrilla intelligence manifests itself. Go to the comments now and answer the following tactical question. What exact percentage of your total assets is still criminally exposed to the illusion of paper money? And what is your immediate action plan to convert this lethal exposure into physical and tangible assets before the end of this quarter? I will read and analyze your answers personally. I want to know if you are prioritizing segregated vaults outside the banking system, or if you still trust the empty digital promises of your brokerage. Your answer could be the ultimate wake-up call. Another member of our community needed to finally awaken from their financial trance and save their own family. The clock is ticking relentlessly against your bank account and against the future of those who depend on your decision-making ability today. The big institutional players are already positioned for the final strangulation of silver and the carnage of derivatives, and they eagerly await your continued passiveness, serving as their exit liquidity. Don't be easy prey in this predatory ecosystem. The historic collapse has already begun. The supply deficit data for the last 5 consecutive years is mathematically irrefutable, and the noose around the market makers' necks is tightening every second. Sign up, protect yourself with real assets, join those who refuse to be victims of the state, and remain absolutely vigilant. We'll see you in the next intelligence update, when yet another pillar of this global house of cards crumbles before our eyes.